Before money comes into your life, your mind will be tested, not because life is against you, not because God forgot you, and not because prosperity is too far away, but because money can only remain where the mind is strong enough to carry it. And this is where most people misunderstand the process. They think pressure means failure. They think delay means rejection. They think discomfort means they are on the wrong path. But many times, the pressure is not there to stop you. It is there to reveal what still needs to be strengthened inside you. Because before your life changes on the outside, your identity must change on the inside. Your patience will be tested. Your discipline will be tested. Your faith will be tested. Your emotions will be tested. And your ability to keep moving when nothing seems to be happening will be tested. This is why so many people quit right before their breakthrough. They do not recognize the season they are in. They think life is closing a door, when in reality, life is training their mind to walk through a bigger one. So in this video, I want to show you why your mind is tested before money comes, why your old identity fights so hard to survive, and why the season that feels heavy may actually be preparing you for a higher level of prosperity. And stay with me until the end, because I will give you 3 powerful bonus insights that reveal your mentality is already changing. These signs are subtle. Most people ignore them. But if you understand them, you may realize that you are not losing yourself. You are becoming someone new. One sign feels like silence. One feels like discomfort. And one feels like losing interest in things that used to control you. But before we continue, take a second and like this video. That simple action helps this message reach more people who need it. And if you want more content about mindset, wealth, discipline, faith, and prosperity, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. And write this in the comments. My mind is ready for a new level. Because maybe this is more than a comment. Maybe it is your first declaration that you will not run from the test. You will pass through it and become strong enough to carry the life you asked for. The test comes before the transformation. There is something nobody tells you about prosperity. Most people think the moment their life starts changing, they will instantly feel happier, lighter, and more confident. But many times, the opposite happens first. Life gets uncomfortable. Your mind becomes restless. Old fears suddenly return. And the strange part is that this often happens right before a breakthrough. I remember talking to someone a few years ago who told me something I never forgot. They said, "I feel like I'm becoming more aware, but my life feels heavier at the same time." And honestly, that sentence describes what many people experience when they begin changing internally. Because awareness changes everything. Once your mind starts waking up, you begin seeing patterns you ignored for years. You notice how certain people drain your energy. You notice how distraction steals your focus. You notice how emotional habits quietly sabotage your future. And suddenly, life feels different. Not because you became negative, but because you became conscious. That is an important difference. A person who sleeps through life feels temporary comfort. A person who becomes conscious starts seeing what needs to change. And seeing clearly can feel uncomfortable at first. Imagine someone living in a dark room for years. Then one day, the curtains open. The light hurts their eyes. Not because light is bad, but because darkness became familiar. That is exactly what happens when a person starts mentally evolving. The old identity resists. And most people misunderstand this resistance. They think, maybe I'm losing motivation. Maybe I'm not capable. Maybe this dream is too big for me. But many times, the discomfort is not a sign that you should stop. It is a sign that your mind is stretching beyond the level it became comfortable living in. Napoleon Hill spoke about this repeatedly in Think and Grow Rich. He noticed that before people reached major success, they almost always passed through periods of uncertainty, temporary defeat, emotional pressure, or confusion, not after success. Before it, that changes the way you see hard seasons. Because maybe the pressure in your life is not punishment. Maybe it is preparation. And I want you to think about something carefully. Every important transformation in life begins invisibly. A seed grows underground before anyone sees the tree. A person studies quietly before becoming successful publicly. A body changes internally before the mirror reflects it. But modern culture trained people to expect instant evidence for everything. If results do not appear quickly, people assume nothing is happening, and this mindset destroys potential, because the most powerful changes usually happen silently first. I learned this lesson personally during a period where I felt frustrated with my own progress. I was learning, reading, trying to become more disciplined. But externally, my life still looked almost the same. And honestly, that phase can mess with your mind. Because when effort is invisible, doubt becomes louder. That is why so many people quit too early. They stop during the invisible stage. They stop while the roots are still growing underground. And the dangerous part is that the mind always tries to pull you back toward what feels familiar, even if familiar is painful. That sounds strange, but it is true. Some people stay in toxic routines because chaos became emotionally normal. Some stay financially stuck because struggle became part of identity. Some remain distracted constantly because silence forces them to confront themselves. And this is why mental growth feels uncomfortable. You are not only changing habits, you are changing identity. That is much deeper. Because identity controls behavior. A person who sees themselves as undisciplined will struggle to stay consistent. A person who secretly believes wealth is dangerous will unconsciously sabotage opportunities. A person raised in survival mode often struggles to feel safe slowing down emotionally. And survival mode changes the way people think. When someone spends years stressed about money, fear becomes automatic. They begin reacting emotionally to everything. Small problems feel catastrophic. Rest becomes guilt. Stillness becomes anxiety. And eventually, the nervous system forgets how peace even feels. This is why some people cannot relax without grabbing their phone every few minutes. The mind became addicted to stimulation, constant noise, constant distraction, constant escape. But here is something powerful I want you to understand. Your future is heavily influenced by what repeatedly enters your mind. That is why the books you read matter. The conversations you tolerate matter. The content you consume matters. Your environment shapes your thinking more than most people realize. For example, if someone spends 2 hours every day consuming negativity, gossip, outrage, and fear online, their emotional state will eventually reflect that environment. But if someone spends even 30 minutes daily feeding their mind with clarity, discipline, and wisdom, their thinking slowly begins changing. This is why books like The Power of Your Subconscious Mind and Atomic Habits have impacted millions of people. Not because reading magically changes life overnight, but because repeated ideas slowly reshape identity, and identity reshapes decisions. Small decisions repeated for years become destiny. That is why mental transformation is not usually dramatic in the beginning. It is subtle, quiet, almost invisible. You start thinking differently, reacting differently, wanting different things, protecting your energy differently, and eventually, your external life starts reflecting those internal shifts. But there is one problem almost nobody notices. The moment your mind starts evolving, something immediately begins fighting for your attention again. Distraction. Your mind was programmed to return to the old version of you. One of the strangest things about human nature is this. People can sincerely want a better life and still sabotage every opportunity that could create it. At first, that sounds irrational. Why would someone pray for change, then run back to the same habits? Why would someone dream about prosperity, but continue thinking like a person trapped in survival mode? Because the conscious mind wants growth. But the subconscious mind wants familiarity. And familiarity is powerful, even when it hurts you. I once heard a man explain it in a simple way. He said, "Your mind is like a thermostat. If the thermostat has been set to struggle for years, every time life starts improving, the subconscious tries to pull you back toward what feels emotionally normal. That explains why some people create chaos the moment things begin getting better. They start making progress, then suddenly lose focus. They begin saving money, then emotionally spend everything. They build discipline for a few weeks, then disappear back into distraction. Not because they are weak, but because their identity still feels more comfortable in the old reality. And this is deeper than motivation. This is programming. Most people do not realize how much of their identity was built during emotionally vulnerable moments. Childhood, fear, embarrassment, rejection. Watching stressed adults constantly struggle financially. Hearing phrases like, "Money is hard to make." "People like us never get ahead." "Rich people are selfish." Be realistic. Those ideas may seem small, but repeated ideas become subconscious beliefs. And subconscious beliefs quietly control behavior. That is why two people can receive the exact same opportunity and respond completely differently. One sees possibility, the other sees risk. One takes action, the other hesitates until the opportunity disappears. And most of the time, the difference is not intelligence. It is identity. Napoleon Hill understood this long before modern neuroscience started explaining it scientifically. That is why he constantly emphasized repetition, autosuggestion, and mental conditioning in Think and Grow Rich. He knew the subconscious mind accepts whatever is repeated emotionally over time. And eventually, what the mind accepts internally becomes behavior externally. This is why your environment matters so much. Not only your physical environment, your mental environment too. Think about the average person's daily routine. Wake up stressed. Immediately check notifications. Consume negativity online. Compare themselves to strangers. Listen to pessimistic conversations. Repeat the same emotional cycles every day. Then wonder why they feel mentally exhausted and emotionally blocked. The mind absorbs repetition quietly, like soil absorbing water. And eventually, whatever enters repeatedly starts shaping identity. That is why protecting your mind is not motivational advice. It is survival. A few years ago, I started noticing something interesting about highly disciplined people. They were extremely selective about what they consumed mentally, not because they were trying to act superior, but because they understood something simple. Your attention eventually becomes your personality, and your personality eventually creates your life. This is why focused people often seem different. They protect silence. They avoid unnecessary chaos. They become intentional with conversations. They spend time learning instead of constantly escaping through entertainment. And no, this does not mean becoming obsessed with productivity every second of the day. It simply means becoming conscious about what is shaping your mind. For example, if someone spends hours every night feeding anxiety through endless scrolling, their nervous system eventually starts living in that emotional state. But if someone spends even 20 minutes daily strengthening their thinking, their perspective slowly changes. That is why reading can become such a powerful form of mental reprogramming. Books like The Magic of Thinking Big or As a Man Thinketh are powerful because they interrupt limiting mental patterns. They introduce new internal possibilities. And new possibilities change decisions. One practical habit that helps reprogram the mind is creating intentional moments without noise. No phone, no music, no constant stimulation. Just 10 minutes of silence daily. At first, it feels uncomfortable, almost awkward. And honestly, that discomfort reveals something important. Many people are not afraid of silence. They are afraid of meeting themselves without distraction. But awareness changes everything. Because once you begin observing your thoughts clearly, you stop automatically believing every fear that enters your mind. And that creates power. Little by little, your reactions change. Your standards change. Your emotional tolerance changes. You begin noticing opportunities instead of only obstacles. Not because life suddenly changed overnight, but because your internal filters changed. And this is where things become dangerous. Because once your mind begins evolving, the world immediately starts competing harder for your attention. And most people have no idea how much distraction is silently destroying their future. Distraction is keeping most people poor without them realizing it. One of the greatest misunderstandings about success is this. People think lack of money is the biggest problem. But many times, the real problem is scattered attention. Because a distracted mind struggles to build anything meaningful for long. And modern life is designed to keep people distracted. Constant notifications, endless entertainment, infinite scrolling, too much information, too many opinions, too much noise. Most people wake up and immediately allow the world to invade their mind before they even think for themselves. And little by little, their attention becomes fragmented. This is dangerous because attention is creative energy. Whatever consistently holds your attention eventually starts shaping your emotions, decisions, habits, and identity. That means if fear constantly captures your attention, fear begins shaping your life. If comparison constantly captures your attention, insecurity begins shaping your life. If distraction constantly captures your attention, your potential slowly weakens. And honestly, many people do not realize how overstimulated their mind has become. They cannot sit in silence for 5 minutes without reaching for the phone. The moment life becomes quiet, they search for stimulation again. Another video, another notification, another distraction. Because distraction became emotional escape. And this is deeper than entertainment. Sometimes people are not addicted to social media. They are addicted to avoiding themselves, avoiding uncomfortable thoughts, avoiding unresolved emotions, avoiding the fear that they may be wasting their potential. Napoleon Hill understood something powerful that modern culture ignores. A focused mind becomes extremely powerful. That is why he constantly talked about definiteness of purpose and controlled attention. Because success requires sustained focus, not temporary excitement. Think about anything meaningful in life. A strong body requires consistency. A peaceful mind requires consistency. A successful business requires consistency. A deep relationship requires consistency. And consistency becomes almost impossible when attention is constantly broken. I once heard someone say, most people are not physically tired. They are mentally overloaded. And honestly, that explains modern life perfectly. Too much information, too much stimulation, too much emotional noise. The brain never fully rests. And eventually, people lose the ability to think deeply. They react emotionally to everything. They lose patience quickly. They struggle to focus. They feel busy all day while accomplishing very little. And the scary part is that distraction rarely looks dangerous in the moment. That is what makes it dangerous. Nobody ruins their future dramatically overnight. Usually it happens slowly, scroll by scroll, excuse by excuse, day after day, until years pass and people realize they spent more time consuming life than building one. That is why learning to protect your attention is one of the highest forms of self-respect. A focused mind becomes dangerous in the best possible way, because focus multiplies energy. I remember going through a period where I felt mentally exhausted almost every day, not because I was working too hard, but because my mind never stopped consuming noise. And one small change helped me more than I expected. I stopped touching my phone during the first 30 minutes of the morning. That simple habit changed my emotional state completely. Instead of beginning the day reacting to the world, I started beginning the day intentionally, reading a few pages, writing thoughts, praying, sitting in silence for a few minutes. Nothing dramatic, but over time, that small change created mental clarity. And clarity changes decisions. This is why highly successful people often protect their mornings carefully, not because they are obsessed with routines, but because they understand the emotional direction of the day matters. One practical thing you can start doing immediately is reducing unconscious consumption. For example, instead of spending 2 hours every night scrolling through random content, replace even 20 minutes with something that strengthens your mind. Read deep work. Listen to meaningful conversations. Study people who built disciplined lives. Feed your mind intentionally instead of emotionally, because eventually your mind becomes shaped by whatever you repeatedly consume. And another important thing happens when distraction decreases. You begin hearing your own thoughts more clearly. At first, this can feel uncomfortable, because silence exposes what noise hides: fear, doubt, confusion, insecurity. But that awareness is necessary. You cannot heal what you constantly avoid. And this is why many people stay trapped for years. Not because they lack intelligence, but because they never slow down enough to see what is controlling them internally. Once awareness begins growing, everything changes. Your standards rise. Your discipline improves. Your emotional reactions begin shifting. And strangely enough, that is usually the moment life starts feeling emotionally heavier for a while. Because when your mind begins evolving, your old identity starts fighting to survive emotionally. The emotional test that makes most people give up. One thing I've noticed about life is this: the hardest battles are usually invisible. Most people are not fighting enemies outside themselves every day. They are fighting discouragement, fear, anxiety, overthinking, emotional exhaustion. And this is why emotional control is one of the greatest forms of wealth a person can develop. Because when emotions control your decisions, your life becomes unstable. A bad day changes your focus. A setback destroys your motivation. One rejection makes you doubt your future. And little by little, emotions begin controlling direction. This is why so many people start strong and quit halfway. Not because they lack ability, but because emotionally they cannot tolerate uncertainty for very long. And uncertainty is uncomfortable, especially when you are trying to improve your life while seeing little immediate evidence. You pray, but nothing changes quickly. You work hard, but results still feel invisible. You become more disciplined, but your reality still looks almost the same. That phase can mess with your mind, because the human brain loves immediate proof. But life often develops people silently first. I remember hearing a story about bamboo trees that stayed with me for years. For a long time, bamboo grows underground before visible growth appears above the surface. Imagine watering the soil every day while seeing almost nothing happening. Most people would quit. They would assume the process failed. But underground, the roots are expanding, preparing for rapid growth later. Human transformation works the same way. Many breakthroughs are invisible before they become visible. And emotionally reactive people often quit during invisible seasons. That is why emotional maturity matters so much. Not becoming emotionless, becoming stable. There is a huge difference. Stable people still fear fear, still feel doubt, still feel frustration, but they stop allowing temporary emotions to control permanent decisions. That changes everything. Because most people wake up asking, "How do I feel today?" Strong people ask, "What needs to be done today, regardless of how I feel?" That mindset creates power. Napoleon Hill constantly emphasized persistence because he understood something most people ignore. Success often happens after the moment most people emotionally give up. And honestly, this is where faith becomes important. Not fantasy. Not pretending problems do not exist. Real faith. The ability to continue moving while results are still forming invisibly. There is a verse in the Bible that says, "For we walk by faith, not by sight." That verse becomes deeply practical when you understand psychology, because sight reacts to current conditions. Faith connects to future possibility. Sight says, nothing is changing. Faith says, something is happening beneath the surface. And this does not mean ignoring reality. It means refusing to let temporary circumstances define your identity. Some people emotionally collapse too early. One difficult season appears, and they immediately believe life is against them. But pressure does not always mean destruction. Sometimes pressure reveals weakness that needs strengthening. A person who loses emotional control over small problems will struggle carrying larger responsibilities later. That is why emotional discipline matters before prosperity arrives. Because money amplifies emotional patterns already inside you. If someone is internally chaotic, more money often creates more chaos. If someone lacks emotional control, success can magnify stress instead of peace. This is why life often strengthens the mind before increasing responsibility. And one emotional pattern that quietly destroys many people is resentment. Resentment toward the past, toward people who succeeded faster, toward opportunities they never received, toward life itself. But resentment traps attention inside old pain, and attention trapped in bitterness cannot fully build the future. That is why forgiveness becomes powerful psychologically. Not because the past was acceptable, but because carrying emotional poison slowly weakens the person carrying it. Another dangerous emotional habit is comparison. Modern culture makes this almost unavoidable. People compare their real life to someone else's highlight reel online. And comparison creates invisible emotional pressure. A person stops hearing their own path because they become obsessed with everyone else's timeline. But prosperity requires internal alignment. You cannot build peace while emotionally living inside someone else's reality. This is why emotionally disciplined people protect their focus carefully. They celebrate others without abandoning themselves. They understand that life unfolds differently for everyone. And perhaps most importantly, they stop interpreting every difficult season as proof they are failing. Because some seasons are not punishment. They are preparation. And strangely, when a person begins becoming emotionally stronger, life often starts feeling uncomfortable in a new way. Not because they are moving backward, but because the old version of them is slowly losing control. When your old identity starts dying, life can feel strange. There is a phase of transformation that almost nobody talks about. A phase where you no longer feel connected to the old version of yourself. But you also have not fully become the new person yet. And honestly, this stage can feel strange. You begin noticing changes inside yourself that are difficult to explain. Certain conversations start feeling exhausting. Old habits lose their excitement. Some environments suddenly feel heavy. You become more sensitive to negativity, noise, and emotional chaos. And at first, this can feel confusing. Because part of you wonders, why don't I enjoy the same things anymore? But many times, this is not depression. It is awareness. Your mind is changing. And when awareness grows, compatibility changes too. I remember a period in my life where I started feeling disconnected from things that once entertained me for hours. Endless scrolling, pointless conversations, constant distraction. At first, I thought something was wrong with me. But later, I realized something important. Growth changes appetite. A child can spend hours entertained by something simple. But as the mind matures, depth becomes more attractive than stimulation. The same thing happens emotionally and spiritually. As your identity evolves, superficial things lose power over you. And this is one of the clearest signs that your mentality is beginning to shift. Because mentally strong people start valuing different things: peace over drama, focus over noise, purpose over temporary pleasure. And this shift can feel lonely sometimes. Not because you hate people, but because internally you no longer resonate with the same energy. This is why growth often creates temporary emotional distance. You begin protecting your energy differently. You become more intentional with time. You stop wanting to be emotionally available for every distraction around you. And honestly, some people around you may not understand that change. They may think you became distant, too serious, too quiet. But what is really happening is that your priorities are changing. And priorities always reshape behavior. There is a reason highly focused people often spend time alone, not because isolation is magical, but because clarity grows in silence. Constant noise makes self-awareness difficult. That is why many successful thinkers protect solitude carefully. Writers do this. Inventors do this. Spiritual leaders do this. Even Jesus repeatedly withdrew from crowds before important moments. Silence allows the mind to reorganize itself. And when your identity is changing internally, you need moments where your own thoughts become louder than the world around you. That is why many people experience quieter seasons before major breakthroughs. Life starts removing distractions, reducing emotional noise, creating space. And emotionally reactive people often panic during this phase. They think, why does my life suddenly feel so different? But many times, life is not isolating you to punish you. It is creating space for transformation, because the old version of you cannot carry the future you are asking for. And this is where many people sabotage themselves. The moment discomfort appears, they run back toward familiar patterns, back toward old distractions, old environments, old emotional habits. Not because those things are healthy, but because they feel emotionally safe. And familiarity is addictive, even painful familiarity. That is why some people remain stuck in cycles for years, not because they lack intelligence, but because emotionally they keep choosing comfort over expansion. And honestly, transformation requires letting certain parts of your old life die. Old mentalities, old reactions, old excuses, old emotional addictions. That process is uncomfortable, but it is necessary. A person cannot build a disciplined future while protecting every undisciplined habit emotionally. And this is why prosperity is not only financial, it is psychological. Because before money grows externally, capacity must grow internally. This is also why emotionally mature people stop obsessing over appearing successful immediately. They become more focused on building internal structure, discipline, patience, clarity, emotional stability, focus, because those qualities sustain prosperity once it arrives. Without them, success becomes difficult to maintain. And something interesting begins happening during this phase. You start noticing small internal shifts. You react differently. You think differently. Your tolerance for chaos decreases. Your awareness increases. And slowly, your mind begins showing subtle signs that your internal world is changing. Signs most people completely overlook. The signs that your mind is being prepared for a higher level. Most people think transformation is dramatic. A big moment, a sudden breakthrough, a visible change everyone notices immediately. But real transformation usually begins quietly, internally, almost invisibly. And if you do not recognize the signs correctly, you may think nothing is happening, when in reality, your entire mentality is slowly changing. One of the first signs is this: you start losing tolerance for chaos. Drama becomes exhausting. Negative conversations feel heavy. Being around emotionally reactive people drains your energy faster. And this surprises many people because they think prosperity is only about gaining money. But often, prosperity begins with emotional separation from what weakens you. You become more protective of your peace, not because you became cold, but because your mind starts understanding that energy matters. Another sign is that silence begins feeling valuable. This is powerful because most people today are uncomfortable without stimulation. The moment life becomes quiet, they grab the phone, open another app, play another video, anything to avoid stillness. But when your mentality begins changing, silence stops feeling empty. It starts feeling restorative. You begin enjoying moments alone, not from sadness, from clarity. Because silence helps the mind reorganize itself. Some of the best decisions in life are made in quiet moments. That is why many successful people intentionally create space away from constant noise. And honestly, one practical thing that helps tremendously is creating small moments of silence during the day. Even 10 minutes. No music, no scrolling, no distractions. Just breathing and thinking clearly. Simple habits like this calm the nervous system more than most people realize. Another powerful sign is that wasting time begins feeling painful. This is important, because before awareness grows, people can spend years distracting themselves without thinking deeply about it. Hours disappear online. Days blur together. Life becomes repetitive. But eventually, something changes internally. You become more aware of time, more aware of energy, more aware of potential. And suddenly, wasting your life starts feeling uncomfortable. This is often a sign that your identity is evolving, because disciplined people value time differently. They understand that attention creates life. That is why they become more intentional about what enters the mind. Books, conversations, environment, information. Everything matters. And this is where reading becomes powerful. Not because books magically change reality overnight, but because repeated ideas slowly reshape thinking. For example, books like Atomic Habits or The Compound Effect teach something most people underestimate. Small actions repeated consistently create enormous results over time. That principle applies mentally too. Small disciplined thoughts repeated daily reshape identity. Another subtle sign is emotional stability. Things that once destroyed your peace no longer affect you the same way. You stop reacting emotionally to every opinion. You stop needing validation constantly. You stop explaining yourself to everyone. And honestly, this is one of the clearest signs of mental growth. Emotionally reactive people leak enormous amounts of energy, but emotionally grounded people conserve it. And conserved energy becomes focus. Focus becomes discipline. Discipline becomes momentum. Momentum changes life. This is why emotionally strong people often appear calmer, not because life stopped testing them, but because they stopped allowing every emotion to control their direction. And another important sign appears too. Your standards begin rising automatically. You want better conversations, better routines, better environments, better habits, not from ego, from alignment. Your mind begins rejecting what no longer matches the future you are building internally. And yes, this can feel lonely sometimes, because growth changes compatibility. The people and environments that once felt normal may suddenly feel emotionally exhausting. But this is not always loss. Sometimes it is recalibration. And perhaps the most important sign of all is this. You begin observing your thoughts instead of automatically believing them. That changes everything. Because most people unconsciously become whatever they think repeatedly. Fear enters, they obey it. Doubt enters, they believe it. Negativity enters, they absorb it. But awareness creates separation. You start realizing, I am having this thought, but I do not have to become this thought. That realization creates power, and once awareness grows, Self-sabotage becomes easier to recognize. You notice emotional triggers faster. You notice destructive habits faster. You notice how certain environments affect your energy. And slowly, your internal world becomes more intentional. But there is still one final challenge. Because recognizing transformation is not enough. You must learn how to continue growing without falling back into old emotional patterns again. How to stop falling back into the old version of yourself. One of the hardest parts of growth is not starting. It is continuing. Because almost anyone can feel motivated for a few days. The real challenge is staying aligned after the emotional excitement disappears. That is where identity is revealed. I used to think discipline meant forcing yourself aggressively all the time. No rest, no weakness, no emotional struggle. But over time, I realized something important. Real discipline is not about becoming emotionless. It is about building systems strong enough to protect you on difficult days. Because difficult days will come. Some mornings you will feel inspired. Other mornings, your mind will feel heavy for no clear reason. And if your future depends entirely on motivation, your progress will always be unstable. That is why structure matters more than emotion. Think about a bridge during a storm. The bridge survives because the structure is strong, not because the weather became easier. The human mind works the same way. The goal is not to eliminate uncomfortable emotions. The goal is to become stable enough that emotions no longer control your direction. And one of the best ways to do this is through small, non-negotiable habits. Simple actions repeated consistently. Waking up intentionally. Protecting your mornings. Reading daily. Praying. Exercising. Writing thoughts down. Not because these habits look impressive online, but because repetition slowly reshapes identity. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, your self-respect increases. Every time you constantly betray your own intentions, internal trust weakens. And eventually, people either build confidence internally or build self-doubt internally, one decision at a time. That is why small habits matter more than dramatic moments. A person who reads 10 pages every day may finish over 10 books in a year. A person who saves a small amount consistently builds financial discipline over time. A person who spends 20 focused minutes daily learning a valuable skill eventually becomes difficult to ignore professionally. Small actions compound. That is one of the most important laws of life. And honestly, this is why so many people stay stuck. They underestimate consistency because consistency looks boring in the beginning. People want dramatic transformation, but life usually changes through accumulation. Thought by thought, habit by habit, decision by decision. I remember hearing someone say, "Your life is usually the delayed result of your daily routines." That sentence is powerful because it removes the fantasy of overnight success. And strangely, that is liberating. Because it means your future is not built in one giant moment. It is built quietly, daily. Another thing that helps people stop falling back into old patterns is protecting environment carefully. Environment silently shapes behavior. If you constantly surround yourself with distraction, negativity, and emotional chaos, staying mentally focused becomes harder. Energy spreads. Mindset spread. Standards spread. That does not mean cutting everyone off dramatically. It simply means becoming intentional about influence. Ask yourself honestly, what kind of conversations dominate your life? What type of content controls your attention? Who affects your emotional state most often? Because eventually, repeated exposure becomes internal programming. This is why many disciplined people intentionally limit mental noise. Not because they are antisocial, but because clarity requires protection. And one practical habit that helps tremendously is creating intentional mornings. Most people wake up and instantly consume stress, notifications, news, comparison, noise, before their own mind even stabilizes. But mentally strong people often begin differently. Silence first, intention first, clarity first. Sometimes I recommend something very simple. For the first 20 minutes of the morning, avoid your phone completely. Instead, read a few pages. Pray, stretch, write your thoughts. Visualize your future calmly. That small habit alone can change emotional direction dramatically over time, because the beginning of the day often shapes the emotional rhythm of everything that follows. Another powerful shift happens when you stop obsessing over immediate results. This is difficult today because modern culture trained people to expect instant feedback constantly. But meaningful transformation often happens slowly, and slow progress frustrates emotionally impatient people. That is why emotionally mature people focus more on alignment than speed. They understand that roots matter before visible growth appears. And honestly, this is where faith becomes practical again. Not passive waiting, active trust. Continuing to build even when visible evidence feels limited. Continuing to improve internally, even while external results are still catching up. Because eventually, reality begins reflecting repeated internal patterns. And when someone truly commits to this process, something incredible begins happening. They stop needing constant external validation. They stop panicking during difficult seasons. They stop running back toward old distractions every time life feels uncomfortable. And slowly, their inner world becomes stronger than their circumstances. That is when prosperity stops being fantasy. It starts becoming capacity. And now, I want to share the first bonus sign that your mentality may already be changing. Bonus 1, WHEN silence starts feeling good. Your mind is changing. One of the strongest signs that your mentality is evolving is surprisingly simple. You begin enjoying silence. Not loneliness, silence. That may not sound important at first. But in a world addicted to stimulation, silence becomes extremely powerful. Most people today cannot stay alone with their thoughts for very long. The moment life becomes quiet, they reach for distraction. The phone, the television, social media, music, anything to avoid stillness. And honestly, this reveals something deeper. Many people are not addicted to entertainment. They are addicted to escaping themselves, escaping anxiety, escaping unresolved emotions, escaping the uncomfortable feeling that they may be wasting their potential. But when your mind starts changing, silence stops feeling empty. It starts feeling restorative. You begin craving clarity more than noise. And this is important because clarity rarely grows in chaos. I remember a season in my life where everything became quieter. Fewer conversations, less distraction, less need to constantly be around people. At first, it felt strange, almost uncomfortable. But eventually, I realized something powerful. That silence was helping me hear my own thoughts clearly again. No emotional noise. No constant comparison. No pressure to react to everything happening around me. And little by little, my mind became calmer, more intentional, more focused. This is why many wise people throughout history protected solitude carefully. Not permanent isolation, intentional silence. Because silence allows the nervous system to slow down. It allows awareness to grow. It allows the mind to reorganize itself emotionally. Even Jesus repeatedly withdrew from crowds before important moments. There is power in stepping away from noise long enough to reconnect with yourself. And practically speaking, this is something you can begin applying immediately. Create small moments of silence during the day. 10 minutes without stimulation. No scrolling, no multitasking, just quiet reflection. You would be surprised how much mental clarity returns when the brain is no longer overloaded constantly. And strangely enough, once silence becomes comfortable, another shift usually begins happening too. Discomfort starts appearing in places where you once felt emotionally comfortable. Bonus 2. Discomfort can be a sign that you're outgrowing your old life. One of the clearest signs that your mentality is changing is this. Things that once felt normal start feeling uncomfortable. Certain conversations drain you faster. Certain habits stop feeling satisfying. Certain environments suddenly feel heavy. And at first, this can confuse people. They think, why do I feel disconnected lately? But many times, this is not failure. It is growth. Because as your awareness rises, your tolerance for emotional chaos decreases. You begin realizing how much energy distraction steals, how much negativity affects your mind, how much time was being wasted unconsciously. And once you see those patterns clearly, it becomes difficult to enjoy them the same way again. That is why growth can feel uncomfortable before it feels rewarding. Your old identity still wants familiarity, but your future requires expansion. And expansion rarely feels comfortable in the beginning. A person building discipline feels resistance. A person changing financially feels uncertainty. A person evolving mentally often feels temporarily disconnected from old patterns. That is normal. The mistake is assuming discomfort automatically means you are on the wrong path. Sometimes discomfort simply means your life is stretching beyond what used to feel emotionally safe. And honestly, this is where many people go backward. The moment life feels unfamiliar, they run back toward old distractions, old habits, and old emotional patterns. Not because those things are healthy, but because they are familiar. And familiarity can become addictive, even when it keeps you stuck. This is why emotionally strong people stop asking, how do I avoid discomfort? And start asking, what kind of discomfort leads me toward the life I truly want? That question changes everything, because some discomfort destroys you, but some discomfort develops you. Exercise is uncomfortable. Learning new skills is uncomfortable. Changing habits is uncomfortable. Building a better future is uncomfortable. But those forms of discomfort create growth. And once you understand this, you stop panicking every time life feels challenging emotionally. You begin recognizing that pressure may be preparing you instead of punishing you. And eventually, one final sign begins appearing naturally. You start losing interest in things that once controlled your entire life. Bonus 3. You start losing interest in things that used to control you. One of the final signs that your mentality is truly changing is that certain things slowly lose power over you. The constant need for validation, the addiction to distraction, the obsession with proving yourself to everyone, the emotional attachment to chaos. At first, this shift feels subtle. You simply notice that some things no longer excite you the same way. Pointless scrolling feels empty. Certain conversations feel repetitive. Drama becomes exhausting instead of entertaining. And honestly, this is one of the strongest signs of internal growth. Because mentally immature people are controlled by impulse. Mentally strong people become guided by intention. That changes everything. I remember a period where I realized I no longer enjoyed spending hours consuming random content online. Not because I became better than anyone, but because my mind started craving depth more than stimulation, peace more than noise, purpose more than distraction. And that shift changed my life more than I expected, because attention shapes identity. Whatever constantly controls your attention eventually influences your emotions, decisions, and behavior. That is why emotionally mature people become very intentional about what they feed their mind. Not from arrogance, from awareness. They realize energy is valuable, and they stop spending it carelessly. This is also why your priorities begin changing during growth. You start valuing clarity more, discipline more, focus more, meaningful conversations more. You begin protecting your peace differently. And no, this does not mean life becomes boring. Actually, the opposite often happens. Simple things begin feeling more meaningful. A peaceful morning, a focused work session, reading something that expands your thinking, a calm walk without constant stimulation. Moments like these begin feeling valuable because your nervous system is no longer addicted to chaos. And this is one of the greatest forms of freedom a person can experience. When your emotions stop being controlled by every impulse around you, your mind becomes stronger, calmer, more intentional. And eventually, your external life begins reflecting that internal stability. Because prosperity is not only about money, it is about becoming someone capable of sustaining peace, focus, discipline, and abundance without collapsing emotionally. That is why the test comes before the breakthrough. Life strengthens the mind before increasing responsibility. And maybe that difficult season you are experiencing right now is not proof that your life is falling apart. Maybe it is proof that your old identity no longer fits the future waiting for you. Before money changes your life, your mind must change first. That is the part most people never understand. They focus only on external results, more money, more opportunities, more success. But prosperity without emotional stability becomes chaos very quickly. That is why life often tests people before expansion arrives. It tests patience, discipline, focus, faith, emotional control, not to destroy you, to strengthen your capacity. Because the version of you created in survival mode cannot fully sustain the life you keep asking for. And maybe that is why your journey has felt so uncomfortable lately. Maybe your mind is no longer compatible with the old version of your life. Maybe your awareness is growing. Maybe your standards are changing. Maybe your mentality is becoming stronger than your excuses. And if that is happening, do not panic during the process. A seed looks buried before it becomes a tree. Transformation often looks confusing before it becomes visible. So stop interpreting every difficult season as failure. Some seasons are preparation, some seasons are training, and some seasons are teaching your mind how to carry what your prayers have been asking for. Remember this: the goal is not to become perfect. The goal is to become intentional, more aware, more disciplined, more emotionally grounded. Because once your inner world becomes stronger, your external life starts changing differently, more calmly, more consistently, more sustainably. And maybe one day, you will look back at this difficult season and realize something powerful. Life was never trying to break you. It was trying to rebuild you. If this message spoke to you, subscribe to the channel and become part of this community. And if this video helped you see your journey differently, leave a like so this message can reach more people. And write this in the comments: I am becoming strong enough for the life I asked for. Read that sentence again carefully, because your future changes the moment your identity begins changing first. And if you want to continue strengthening your mindset, your discipline, and your prosperity mentality, watch the next video on the channel. Your next level begins with the mind you build every single day.